Okay, what we're going to talk about over the next 40 minutes here I want to talk about entrustable professional activities. How many of you have heard this term before, entrustable professional activity, or EPAs? Not many. Okay. So this is something that I want to discuss very briefly because it's really going to put into context some of the modifications that we made to the evaluation instruments in the experiential education program, and is really the direction that pharmacy student assessment and even pharmacy resident assessment may be going in the future. We'll talk about the updates to the IPPE and APPE evaluations, and then I'll also spend some time going over some of the features of CORE, which is our new experiential learning management system, which will be replacing eValue effective May 20th. And hopefully you have received the email from CORE with your username and passwords. And so we'll go over some of the features of CORE to wrap up. Okay, to start with entrustable professional activities. So EPAs very broadly you can consider them units, defined units of work that could be observed or assigned to a trainee, whether that's a student or a resident. What they do is they take broad competency statements that sometimes are very complex and sophisticated statements and break them down into units of observable work. So think of it as taking, what are the functions of a pharmacist in multiple practice settings and dividing them up into competencies that a student or resident would need to demonstrate a level of competence in prior to either graduation or successfully completing their program, so that they're then trusted or entrusted with the responsibility of performing that particular activity. So I have an example of a competency statement that comes from the accreditation standards, and it reads, provide high-quality, evidence-based, patient-centered care that is appropriate and effective in cooperation with patients, prescribers, and other members of the interprofessional healthcare team. This is a pretty complex statement and maybe difficult to actually assess. Like, is my student capable of performing these activities, or is my resident capable of doing this at a high level? What EPAs do is they take those broad competency statements and then chop them up into smaller pieces of defined work. So an EPA example would be collect information to identify a patient's medication-related problem and healthcare need. Another example would be analyze information to determine the effects of medication therapy, identify medication-related problems, and prioritize health-related needs. I'll show you how these link up with the PPCP, which is up our wheel up here on the wall, but something that we've talked a lot about in the past. But they do all link together. So EPAs are a form of competency-based assessment, meaning that the student has to demonstrate a level of competence in that particular statement to satisfactorily pass that learning experience. It provides a mechanism for us as preceptors in the schools to evaluate the student on their level of competence and are they trusted to be able to do that particular activity. So there's two components that are important. One is there must be trust that the learner has knowledge, skills, and attitudes, which really hasn't changed much over the course of time, but there's this other level of trust that the learner has appropriate self-awareness regarding their own limitations. And so when we talk about how these EPAs are assessed and the different levels of entrustability, you'll see that the goal level of entrustability isn't necessarily that the student is able to perform these skills 100% of the time with 100% accuracy and, really they're perfect at everything by the end of their APPE rotation year. That's not the level of expectation. But what we do hope to instill within them is an understanding and awareness of what they do well, what they need to improve on, and when to ask for assistance, guidance, feedback, even after graduation, because they aren't going to be necessarily functioning at the highest level upon graduation. They're going to be entry-level practitioners in pharmacy practice, but there's still opportunity for growth. And this is a part of the continuing professional development, or CPD, which is a very important topic that we're talking about within pharmacy education now, in that even after graduation, having that self-awareness to know what do I do well, what do I need to improve on, how do I plan to get better at those things that I may not be at the top of my game with, and then how can I assess myself in the future to see did I achieve my goals. So these EPAs for pharmacy graduates, if you're interested, there's a list of them on the AACP website, and I have the link up here. They're broadly grouped into 6 main core domains, which I'll show you an example of on the next slide. And they're broken down further into 15 what are considered core statements. They reflect, like I had said, taking what is the expectation of a pharmacist in multiple practice settings and creating like definable units of work. The other way that these EPAs are utilized are to really define like what is a pharmacist's role, responsibility, what can they offer to a team. Who has seen Office Space before? You guys, a couple more people than that knew what EPAs were, which is good. You probably remember the scene with the Bobs, and they were talking about the employee, and at one point they say, "What exactly is it that you do here?" And he goes into talk about he's a people person and he's got people skills and that kind of stuff. So I was rounding with our general pediatric service at Oshai, and I had a medical student come up to me and basically say that exact same thing to me. He said, "What is it exactly that you do here as the pharmacist on this interprofessional rounding team?" And he was new to the service and hadn't really observed exactly how the pharmacist was integrated into that service, what sort of things I do on a day-to-day basis. But EPAs can be used as a way to advertise what it is a PharmD graduate is able to do upon graduation. So other professions also understand what it is a pharmacist can bring to either a team or a particular practice site. So they're used in ways other than just assessment, but it's helpful in defining what it is, the practice of pharmacy encompasses and the strengths of and what a pharmacist, a PharmD graduate can offer to a team. The recommendation is that all new pharmacy graduates should be able to perform these core EPAs, so these 5 core EPA statements, without direct supervision. And again, this goes back to that they're not necessarily going to be fully formed. They're not going to need coaching. They're not going to need feedback, but they should be able to do this without direct supervision. And this will make a little bit more sense when we get to those levels of assessment. So here's an example of what it looks like for the EPA domains. We have a broad EPA domain, patient, provider, and then the EPA core statements. I already mentioned collect and analyze. There's a few other ones here, but you can see how they link up to the PPCP as well, or the pharmacist patient care process. And so these are more defined, observable units of work that we could then assess a student or trainee on. The levels of assessment are defined in this way. So generally 5 levels. Level 1 being the student requires specific direction, direct supervision, and significant correction for performance improvements, up to level 5, which is a student has mastered the ability as an independent practitioner and is able to give meaningful feedback to other learners. Where do you think an APPE student should be at the time of graduation, so entering practice? What level? 3? Okay. Other? 3, 4. So at this point in time, the EPAs, because they're just getting integrated into curriculums and assessment, there isn't a universal expectation for what the level is. This is really up to the school, and it also depends on the actual EPA statement. So you may have different levels of expectation for different EPA statements. But in general, for PharmD graduates, the level of expectation upon graduation is to be at level 3 for most of those core EPA statements. So they require limited correction. They're self-directed, and they seek guidance as necessary. So they may not necessarily always need to be directly observed performing that skill or that activity. However, they have the self-awareness to know when to ask for help and when to seek further guidance. The reason I mentioned residents, too, is that EPAs have been in medical education for quite some time now, and they extend into residency and postgraduate training. So a MD or a DO graduate, their level might be level 3 upon graduation, but then after their first year of residency, it might be level 4. After their second, their specialty residency program, it might be level 4 or 5. So these, again, extend beyond. And if you look at these things, like, level 5, being able to give meaningful feedback to learners, new practitioners won't necessarily be comfortable or confident doing that, maybe until they've accrued several years of experience working in that particular practice area. So we don't expect them to be at level 5. And I think, some students may get there, but it would be very rare. But, for most APPE students, level 3 is appropriate. And then thinking about our IPPE students, probably more around level 2 for like a third-year pharmacy student, where they require more supervision, more correction, but they're receptive to that feedback. Okay, so how we integrated these EPAs into our evaluations. So the evaluation of professionalism and skills is really a workhorse for our assessment of the experiential education program, both for IPPE 3 rotations and APP rotations. As a reminder, and there's one update here, for all APPE rotations, the student and the preceptor fills this out, and you guys have seen this before, at midpoint and at final. For IPPE3 rotations, it used to be that they were done at midpoint and final, but now we've made it so that it's only required at final. The reason we did that is that, for those of you that have precepted IPPE3 experiences, generally they're somewhere between 40, 55 hours per experience. And so you might have a student at your site for a week. Or, over the summer, I usually take IPPE3 students for a week. Well, what that means is that, I meet them on Monday, and then on Wednesday I have to give them a midpoint, and then Friday is their final. What growth had occurred between Monday and Wednesday, especially when they're at a new site with a new population of children that they probably haven't been exposed to before. And so, how meaningful was that feedback? I think preceptors still can give students feedback on their performance, but we're not necessarily requiring that you do this entire evaluation form at midpoint for the IPPE3s. APPEs are different because you have them there for 6 weeks, so it makes a little bit more sense in that regard. So the evaluation is broken up into two areas, the professionalism evaluation and the skills evaluation. The professionalism is broken up into these three different criteria, either does not meet, meets, or exceeds expectation. These criteria, this is an example, motivation, that hasn't changed, and these criteria haven't changed at all. So it's either does not meet, meets, or exceeds. For the skills, however, there were some changes, and so this is what the skills evaluation looked like. And you might have remembered this from last year, how it looked. We had the different criteria. It's more or less 5 different criteria. And our level of expectation for APP students was somewhere around this, like knows how, or there's this text that you could follow, or you could follow this criteria right here. What we wanted to do is we wanted to take that section and better align it with how an EPA would be assessed, because a lot of these things, like verbal communication, do link back to EPAs indirectly. So what we did is we took that top column here, kept the 5 different levels of assessment, but then just line them up for how an EPA would be assessed. So level 1 through 5. We left these descriptors of, in reference to how they would be performing, a technician versus an intern versus an experienced intern, just as kind of an anchor, so you have a little bit more of an idea of where they might be. But then we included that description of how the EPA was going to be assessed. So again, there's still 5 levels, but we've just changed the description to better align with how the EPAs are assessed. Questions about evaluation of professionalism and skills? Okay. Regarding assignments, so as a reminder, there are no required assignments for APPE rotations. These are up to the preceptor's discretion. So the preceptor may assign and they may evaluate specific assignments, but they're not required and they don't factor into the student's final grade. What we've explained to the students is that the final grade is based off of this evaluation in professionalism and skills. And each of the skills that are evaluated are things that they can practice using an assignment. So drug information is a good example. So there are 3 items on the evaluation of professionalism and skills that relate to information retrieval, drug information retrieval, assessment, and then communication of that information. So on that final evaluation, we will capture how well they're able to retrieve drug information, analyze it, and communicate that. Now they can do DI question or DI responses over the course of that rotation to practice that skill, but that grade on that individual assignment isn't going to impact their final grade. So this is something that the student and the preceptor should work together on, identify things that they're doing well. The midpoint is certainly an opportunity to do that, and then use the assignments as a way to practice those particular skills that will be captured on that final evaluation. There are 2 required assignments for IPPE3 rotations, depending on the rotation, which I'll get to in 2 slides from now. But the preceptor may assign additional coursework at their discretion. A few other changes that we made that I just want to point out. So 2018-19, the current year, and then next year, we had 45 different assignment rubrics that existed, some of which hadn't been used in years. They were all specific to the rotation type. So we had an outpatient drug information response, we had an inpatient drug information response, outpatient and inpatient counseling activities that had very small, subtle changes between them, but really nothing that was substantial. And they used various different scoring scales. Some had 5-point Likert scales, some had total points, some had other 3-point scales, so they were all different. So what we did is we consolidated these 45 rubrics into 8 that align with the core EPAs, and I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. They're universal to all rotations, so they're not specific to inpatient, outpatient, or elective. The drug information rubric is applicable to all rotation types. And they're all assessed the same way on a level of 1 to 5 for each of the criteria. So you and the students get used to assessing them on these different levels of entrustability for these particular skills. So these are the 6 different EPA domains that exist. I showed you the patient-provider one, but there's a few other ones. And these are the assignment rubrics that we created that align with those particular EPA domains. The ones that have the star are the ones that are required for those IPPE 3 rotations, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But for example, the pharmacotherapy care plan was a required assignment for IPPE 3 inpatient rotations. And that rubric links to the EPA course statements that are covered under patient provider and population health promoter. So we wanted to reduce the number of rubrics so that it was a little bit easier to navigate. We wanted to align them with the EPA statements and make the method of which they were assessed consistent with the evaluation of professionalism and skills. So for IPPE 3 rotations, the required assignments, I had mentioned, the drug information questions, so those that are precepting inpatient or outpatient care, that those third-year students had to do a DI. The rubric now is called provision of drug information, and it's intended to encompass not only written drug information responses, but also verbal drug information responses, or if it was a presentation that the student did. So again, these rubrics are intended to be more flexible as well, because we understand that not all students will have to necessarily write a DI, but in your particular practice setting, you might be responding verbally to DI requests more than you are written requests. The pharmacotherapy care plan is required for the inpatient rotations. This rubric is designed to assess many different types of pharmacotherapy care plan. So this could be a pharmacokinetic consult note, an antimicrobial stewardship note, a formulary change, an antibiotic streamlining note. So it could be something specific to your institution as well. So if your pharmacists are engaged in IV to PO conversions, for example, automatic substitutions, you could have the student write that up as part of their care plan, and this rubric would encompass that. We want to move away necessarily from one-size-fits-all thing, but create a rubric that's flexible and aligns with what are the activities that the student is doing at your particular site. The counseling activity required for outpatient rotations, and again, this rubric was designed to encompass multiple different types of outpatient prescription counseling, outpatient or over-the-counter device counseling, prescription products as well. So final grades. As I mentioned, based off of the evaluation of professionalism and skills, for IPPE 3 rotations, although they are required to be assessed on those particular assignments, again, those grades on the assignments don't directly impact their final grade, because those skills that they're practicing are going to be assessed on that evaluation of professionalism and skills. Students will either get a pass, a probationary pass, or fail for the IPPE 3 experiences. Our level of expectation to pass is that for professionalism items, they're at meets expectations, which is that middle column. And then for skills items, level 2, which I had talked about before. If they deviate from that in a negative way, so they do not meet expectations, or they're below level 2, so level 1, they may get a probationary pass or fail. For APPE rotations, again, based off of the evaluation of professionalism and skills, our level of expectation is, again, meets expectation for professionalism items. However, for the skills items, the level of expectation is a level 3. We assign letter grades for APPE rotations through the Office of Experiential Education. The letter grade that corresponds with meets expectations and level 3 right down is a B. If the student gets above that, so exceeds, or level 4 or 5 on the skills, they may get a B+, A-, A. If they are the other direction, so does not meet expectations, or level 2, then their grade will negatively be impacted. But again, this process of the Office of EE assigning the grade is similar to what was done in the past. So it's not your responsibility, but ours to assign that letter grade. Okay, questions before we move on to core? The presentation?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it will be. I will have it available to you actually through core. I'll show you where you can find it. All right. So I'm going to probably jump back and forth a little bit between the slides, because I just want to make sure I stay on track. But a lot of the stuff that I'm going to work through here, I'm just going to show you some of the features of core, where you need to go to find the evaluations, to verify hours, things like that. But certainly it will probably take some time for you to get in there, click around, look for things to get completely comfortable with the system. But just a little background on core. So they are an education technology company. They got their roots were in pharmacy education. So they worked exclusively with pharmacy schools, assessing their curriculums and experiential education. They've since expanded to other professional programs, not just pharmacy programs. But over half of the U.S. schools and colleges of pharmacy in the United States use core, and they have a very high client retention rate. So long story short, they're a very well-established, reputable company, and we're really excited to work with them now because we think that they have a lot of features that preceptors and our office are going to utilize heavily. So you should have received an email from core yesterday with your username and password. And I'm going to jump over to core now and show you a little bit about what it looks like. So we have a test preceptor account that I'll be going through to show you what it looks like. So when you log in, you're going to have your main navigation over here on the left-hand side and then a shorter navigation panel over on the top here. When you click on My Account, you'll have the opportunity to update some information on here. So you can update an address, you can update a phone number, contact information. Your email will be required, but that's something that's already pre-populated. You can change your password in here as well, so certainly going in and changing your password after that initial login. You could do at that My Account tab. Profile information is another really nice feature that you could use. And so if you click on this, you have a couple of options. Under description, you can provide a description of yourself or your rotation. So I just copy and pasted some information from my acute care pediatrics rotation. It's a little bit difficult to read up here, but I could try to make it a little bit easier. So basically just talk a little bit about, what the rotation offers, what some of the expectations are. You can put whatever you want in here, but I'll show you where that will appear for students so they have a little bit more of information about who you are and what your rotation is like. Under documents, you have an opportunity to upload documents that are specifically linked to your rotation, and I'll show you what this looks like for the students as well. So for now, what I did is I uploaded my rotation description and then an article that I usually have most students read, a PK primer, pediatric PK primer. So you could upload this and it'll be tied to your rotation. So any student that's assigned to your rotation will be able to view the description, but then also have access to those documents. And so a lot of times you might have them do pre-readings before they get to your site. They'll all be stored within core, and you can update them through there. View profile is I'll go actually to the student's account so you can see what it looks like on their end. But this student was assigned to this particular rotation. And if they click on the preceptor, they'll get some contact information about the preceptor. This is actually where core is located in Rhode Island, so this is why the test address is there. But there'll be a tab for specifics, so this is that description that I had just put in there, and then documents. And so there's the general pediatric rotation description and then the PK primer, so they could just click on that, and then it'll download for the students, so then they'll have access to that particular article. Okay, so jumping back into our test preceptor. So those are all features under the profile information. For your schedule, there's two places you could look. You could look up here, My Schedule, and it'll give you, each row will be a different student and the rotation. You could also access it over here in scheduling and then rotation schedule. It'll basically give you the same options. You could filter by rotation group, so APPE versus IPPE. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like for mine. I put my picture in there too, just so the students know what I look like. If I go to my schedule, I'll have the students that I have scheduled with me. I could filter it by APPEs, so my APPE students or my IPPE students that I have at Children's. So that's what that'll look like. And then in the rotation schedule, it shows you essentially the same thing as well. So you can look at that and you'll have your calendar for both IPPE and APPE students for the entire year. You can get the student's contact information from here as well. So if you select, the student, you can get their contact information, this is one of our representatives at core. You have a summary of some things, so like their evaluation that's pending, some of the hours that they logged. But I'll show you a different place that we can access that for approval of hours and things like that. The next piece that's really important is probably the evaluations tab. I just want to make sure I'm going through this. So we went to users, schedules, evaluations. Okay. So in the evaluations here, you have evaluations of student and evaluation of the preceptor and site. You don't have to worry too much about this because this is the student's evaluation of you, which will be released at the end of the rotation year like it normally is. And you'll have access to it through core. The evaluation of student, though, you'll be able to access through here. So this is the test student that was assigned to an APPE rotation. And then if you click on this APPE evaluation of professionalism and skills, it will take you to that evaluation. So the first portion is the professionalism items. Again, does not meet, meets, exceeds. And then the skills items appear below that. I've already filled this out for the midpoint so that you can see what it looks like. And so when you open the evaluation, you're going to have a row that says midpoint, and you're going to have a row that says final as well. Obviously, at midpoint, you're going to be filling out the midpoint row. Final, you'll do the final row. This little bracket that says student, this is where the students self-assessed themselves on that particular item. So the practice is that the student fills this evaluation out first before the preceptor does, and then you talk about how they self-assessed and if they did a great job or if they're way off with their self-assessment, because that's another skill that we want them to practice. Once you submit it, then your response becomes this bolded text, and you can kind of go back and look at it. One of the nice things is that this stays in your profile, and so after it's submitted, there's a little M here that says that, that indicates that the midpoint is complete. When it's time to go to the final, one of the nice features is you can copy all midpoint scores to the final evaluation. So if you know where the student was and you wanted to just basically copy the same scores from midpoint to final, you click this button and it'll automatically populate all of the criteria for the final row that you recorded at midpoint. And then you can make changes from there, but this way it'll just fill everything out based on the midpoint evaluation for you. So it might save you a little bit of time. When you get to the end of the rotation, or at the end of the evaluation, really important piece here, the final comments. So like you can see the student comments I have wrote here. I think I'm doing a good job at midpoint. You'll be able to see the student comments at final as well. There's going to be a summary of at midpoint and final for the professionalism items. How many they were at does not meet, how many they were at meet, how many they exceeded, what level they were at for how many criteria, the professionals that they interacted with. And then at the very bottom, there's to be a submit final score. At midpoint, there's actually going to be another button that says submit midpoint score, but it'll also say submit final score. So one important thing to keep in mind is at midpoint, you want to hit the midpoint button. At final, you want to hit the final button. And I have a reminder on one of the slides that I'll be posting to remind you about that. Questions about the evaluation of professionalism and skills? No. Okay. So again, right under evaluations, evaluation of student. Let's see. Hours tracking. So hours tracking, the other function of the preceptor is not only to complete the evaluations, but to verify the hours that the student had logged. And so when you have a student assigned to you and they're logging hours for your rotation, you can find that under hours tracking. So you click on that and you'll see here is an example of hours that were logged that are awaiting your confirmation. So you'll see the student, you'll see the time in, time out. It automatically calculates the number of hours, and then from here you can confirm or deny that particular input. If you click on this pending, you can go to, it toggles between pending and confirmed. So you can see which hours you've already confirmed. So there was 9 to 5, 8 hours that were already confirmed, and there's this 15 hours that are still pending. If you click confirm on one of them and hit update all, if there's several in there, it'll update all of those, so you don't have to go through and click confirm for every single one. If you look at them quickly and then update all of them, then it'll go into the confirmed hours, and then you could reference it from there. The students have the ability to actually run a report to see how many hours they've logged and how many are pending and confirmed, so they'll have an idea of how many they've actually completed at your site. So that's a nice function. But that's under the hours tracking. Then when it's gone, you have no pending hours that need to be confirmed. So pretty straightforward there. The next item are these field encounters. And so I'm going to go back to the slides here because I just want to mention one thing about, yes, question. Yeah. For APPEs, the minimum hours they need to complete are 240. It's the minimum, so they can go above that if the expectation of the preceptor is more than that. But at minimum, 240 hours. 240? Yeah, Chris would be better to answer that. But yeah, usually at 240 hours. Yeah. One thing that we tell the students is to speak with their preceptor about how they would like their hours logged and what hours will count for that particular rotation experience. And so I tell my students that what they're working on assignments that are related to the rotation. So say, again, although it's not required, I ask them to do a case presentation or I ask them to do a drug information response, and they're working on that for 2 hours in the evening, like between 5 and 7 p.m. or something like that. I tell them to log those hours as well, and that counts toward their 240 hours. So it doesn't always necessarily have to be, on-site doing direct patient care or doing, functions. It could be they're working on presentations that they're going to deliver or they're researching things. They could outlog those hours. But we say that's up to the preceptor to decide. If they would rather have them there, at the site for their required 240 hours, that's totally fine and up to the preceptor, but it's up to your discretion how what you consider as hours that count for that rotation experience. The students are given these deadlines in their manual, and it tells them when, this is an example, for midpoint and final, they'll have this table for when their midpoint evaluations are due. Generally, the third week of the rotation on that Tuesday, we ask them to complete the midpoint, and then we ask the preceptors to do the midpoint by Friday, or the final by Friday of that week. And this is to allow for some time for the preceptor to review the student's self-assessment of that evaluation of professionalism and skills. So we ask them to have that done by Tuesday night. If it's not done then, we dock them points. But then between Tuesday and when you do that, their summative evaluation with you, we will hopefully allow you the opportunity then to review their self-assessment so you can talk to them about that. One of the other nice features with CORE is that they do have reminders that can be sent out. And so a student will be actually reminded the week that their evaluation is due. So the midpoint is due on Tuesday. On Saturday, they're going to get an automated email saying your midpoint is due in a few days. And then if they haven't completed it, they'll get another reminder on Tuesday to do it. Those students that did complete it won't get that second reminder. So this is one of the nice automated features within CORE is that we can send reminders for them to do these evaluations. Okay, getting back to the field encounters was the next area that I wanted to highlight. So I mentioned that for APPE, there aren't any required assignments, but you may elect to have the student do an assignment that you'd like to evaluate. These are captured under field encounters. So CORE refers to assignments generally as field encounters. So think of assignments as these particular field encounters. And when a student does one, they will submit it, they'll self-assess, and then you'll be able to view it in this field encounters tracking. So this is an example of a field encounter that was submitted by a student for one of our rubrics is this interprofessional team member interaction. So you might observe the student interacting with another health professional, and you might want to give them some feedback, and we have a rubric now for that to tell them a little bit how they did in that experience and how it links up to that EPA domain. So when the student submits that, you could either confirm or deny if they didn't submit the right one or there was something else that you wanted them to change. But then down here, there's like these assessment fields. So contribute medication-related expertise to the team.
You don't want to send a video. What's this guy talking about?
This is about being a preceptor.
I don't know what I'm talking about either, but so you can then go through and rate the student on each of these criteria. Again, remember the assignment rubrics are based off of those different levels of assessment. And then so you can go through and then confirm or deny that particular field encounter, which is also referred to as our assignments. And then the student will be able to view that feedback. So the terminology is a little bit different. We traditionally had referred to them as assignments, but now they're being referred to as field encounters. But the evaluation is going to be pretty similar. Some real quickly, I know we're running short on time here. A few other areas I want to talk about. The document library is important. It's going to have key documents, so the manual will be in there. APP, IPP manual. Those evaluation forms, so those 8 evaluation forms that I mentioned we created are available in the document library as Word documents. So you could, a preceptor or student could go in there, download it, and have it in Microsoft Word form that they could print. You or the student may elect to fill this out by hand first and then enter it into the system. That's totally fine. But they're all available to you as Word documents in this evaluation forms folder in the document library. Under incidents, so this is something that is new and something different that we haven't, yes?
There's a WebEx question.
Sure. Yeah.
What if we didn't get an email from Corey yesterday?
Okay, so if you haven't received an email from CORE yesterday, if you could just email myself or Chris Jordan, we can resend that email directly to them. So this incident tracking, this is a way, I think of it as a mechanism to track issues or concerns that you have as a preceptor, and then it'll provide us with a trail that we can follow that, you know, if we have to discuss with the student a remediation plan, how we'll actually do that. So I have it here, you know, on this particular date, the test student, I've made a note that they've been late every day this week. I discussed this with the student, the importance of punctuality, and if it continues, we might have to have further action. All you have to do is, you know, record a new incident, and you can type in really anything you want here. This is confidential between you and the Office of Experiential Education. The student doesn't see these things, but certainly if things come up and concerns that you have as a preceptor related to the student's ability to successfully complete the rotation, you could document it through this incident tracking. So then again, we have a trail we can refer back to and look at it, and we can also then provide comment on how we might have addressed some of these particular incidents. So if there was a remediation plan that we came up with, we could put that in here, and we'll have a log then of what was done to address these concerns. Very quickly, self-explanatory, Message Center is going to have really a repository of all messages that are sent from the Office of Experiential Education through CORE. So everybody gets a ton of emails. Sometimes it's hard to go back and look and find these particular emails. You can use the Message Center to search for emails that have been sent by the office in the past. Training and benefits. We're going to post some information that is pertinent to preceptors as it relates to using CORE and some other important pieces of information to help you use it better. One document that I have in there right now is actually the slides from tonight's presentation. So they're in there as a PDF. So if you log into CORE and you navigate to training and benefits, you'll find a copy of tonight's slides as a PDF in there as well. I know we are right up against the end here, but I just wanted to briefly summarize, you know, preceptor requirements for the different learning experiences. And so if you're precepting an IPPE 1 experience, all the students are required to do is log their hours, and then the preceptor just has to confirm those hours. There's no other assessments. The same is true for IPPE 2 experiences for our P2 students. If you're precepting an IPPE 3 experience, there's that evaluation of professionalism and skills at final that's required. There's those 2 assignments that are required depending on the particular rotation, whether it's outpatient or inpatient, and then again, verifying their hours. For APP rotations, the required evaluations for the preceptor are the midpoint evaluation of professionalism and skills, the final evaluation of professionalism and skills, verifying their hours, and if you choose to assign them additional assignments, they'll be captured in those field encounters, but that is up to your discretion. Do we have time for questions, Marcia? We're okay? All right, thanks. Questions? Yes. So the question was the rotation descriptions that you have on file with the Office of Experiential Education, will they be put in there? We, at this point in time, weren't planning on uploading those. We were going to ask if the preceptors wanted to include that information, that they would do that. Certainly if it's something down the road, I think there's other items that we're working on to get up and running first, and then we can help the preceptors if they need assistance with uploading those requirements. But at this point in time, we're not directly uploading those, just in the event also, too, that they've changed or been updated in any way since they were last provided to the school. WebEx questions? Do we have anything? No questions? Okay. Okay, I know we spoke a lot about different things. We know we have a new system. We have some tweaks to the evaluation form. Certainly, please reach out to us if you have any questions. To myself, Chris Jordan, we're more than happy. Pam Canelio, if you're precepting IPP experiences as well. I just like to leave with thanking you for not only your attendance tonight, but also precepting our students. We know that not every student that comes to you is going to be capable of maintaining a transitions of care program. They might need a little bit more coaching, a little bit more love along the way. But that's, why we're here, and that's why we do what we do, is that we're coaching the next generation of pharmacists. And we really certainly appreciate you and your engagement with our school. So on behalf of the Office of EE and UB, we appreciate your service in precepting our